Good evening, welcome to Bon Mott's presents Mott's Ado About Nothing.
Mott's Ado About Nothing. Mott's Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary Mott's scale to classic and contemporary literature.
Mott's Ado About Nothing. Mott's Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language. You have been warned. Hello, and welcome back to the Lost Signals Literary Reviews. I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer, here with Stephen Hermosi.
How are you?
And Scott Thurla.
And they're all out to get me.
They certainly are, Scott. They certainly are. So we're doing something a little bit different tonight, in that we're going to be simultaneously reviewing two works that are very similar.
Mm-hmm.
They are Robert Heinlein's They, and 8 O'Clock in the Morning by Ray Nelson, who was the inspiration for John Carpenter's They Live.
Yeah. Nice tie-in.
Which we have
Hold on.
a little artifact from.
We some of us have been to a John Carpenter show recently, and we got this.
It's signed by John Carpenter. Yeah, so it's just a poster, signed poster, but it's fun. It's a nice relic of things I like.
So is his shirt, by the way. Shout out. Anyway, go on.
So, Scott, would you like to give the funny log line to both of these stories?
Yes, so as implied by my intro, it's that just remember that even if you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
No, that's true. As my father likes to
Yes.
tell me. So, again, we're reviewing both of these, so I'm going to give the plot to both of these stories, which are a man becomes aware that his reality isn't what it seems, and that, in fact, creatures, sometimes aliens, I think it could be generally that
A
kind
nefarious outside force.
exactly,
Right.
has basically cast an illusion upon them, and has set up a society where they mingle amongst humans, but there's they control everything, and that they're so you don't know who's your friends, who is actually one of these creatures, and both of them come to the realization and fight back against this force. And that's the exact plot.
Pretty
of
much the
both of
same
these
shit.
stories.
Exactly.
Now, granted, they diverge in detail a little bit, but
But by and large,
would you guys like to expand?
Right. So in They, it's a man who is in a mental facility and is convinced that he is beset by aliens who are, or maybe not necessarily aliens, who knows, by these creatures who are running his world for some reason. And he is, I think that where it diverges a little bit is he's convinced that he is immortal, and they are just trying to convince him that he is something that he's not. And then it turns out that that's true. And then in 8 O'Clock, the movie based on They Live, or the story that They Live, the movie is based on, I'm sorry, man is just awakened and has to, and to the fact that there are aliens among his people, and he tries to figure them out and goes on a murderous rampage.
he tries to wake other members of society.
In both of these stories, the author is trying to convince you that the protagonist is insane until the very end, when you realize that he was right the whole time. So, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. I think they're both fairly strong stories, but there is something to the brevity of them that precludes me from giving each a 3. I'm probably going to give them 2s for both.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I don't have much more to add because they are so similar. It's always sort of decided to double feature cover, if you will. I guess I'll add on a personal note that I knew about 8 O'Clock in the Morning. I never actually read it till for this podcast. I just knew it existed, and that was the story that They Live is based on. And I'm a big fan of Heinlein, but I was never familiar with this specific story. until again Ian had found it and suggested it for this one. But I do agree. I think if we're going into our scores for each, if that's what we're going to do in a second, like they're going to be pretty similar because, as you said, they're pretty similar stories. But I think what we're going to focus on is discussing like the subtle differences between them and like excuse me, how they portray like specifically the themes and the antagonists. I guess that we decided that are the focal point, like the major point of both, and how like they were done, stylized, I guess we'll say, within each, like as a sort of commentary. So that's pretty much all I have to add, like in a broad sense.
Yeah, I'm giving it a 2 as well because really the same story, and yes, they differ in length and little details, but they also commit the same sins. And I think they're good stories, but it's not they're not narratives for the sake of having a complex and complete narrative.
Exactly.
They're to feature the themes.
Yes. Yeah. It's more of a thought experiment, like,
Yes, absolutely.
Pretty much.
And they're both like kind of little, we've got a like interesting twist ending here. And, it is interesting. However, it's having read stories like this before, it's pretty, you know what's coming. You know what's coming in the twist.
Well, yes, but I mean, to interrupt just real quickly, like because these stories exist, that's why you've seen and read so many things like them.
Yeah,
they're
but
earlier
one was written 20 years earlier than the other.
Right.
Like it's.
But they're still sort of like the golden era, if you will, in quotes, of like sci-fi, like pulp sci-fi, more or less. But sure, yes, you've certainly seen this trope/twist before, and since, definitely since, many times.
So we're all giving 2s for both stories.
I think so.
Yep, to the plot. Yep.
So moving on to themes. Steve, would you like to discuss themes a little bit?
Sure. I think the theme of both of these stories, the main theme, is how much of your world do you really know? And how much can you say for sure is what exists? How many of the people that you know in your life are what they say they are? And both of these stories take that to an extreme of like, oh, that person that you think you know is absolutely not what they say they are at all. They're some kind of horrible creature or like whatever. And again, an interesting theme. I think that themes are probably one of the strongest points of both of these stories because they were created specifically to be stories about this specific theme.
Exactly.
And they work well in that. There's a reason that they made a movie based off of this 8-minute read or whatever, however long 8 o'clock in the morning is, because there's a lot there that can be dug into and talked about. And I think that they both do a good job. However, there's not enough room in either one of them to go crazy into any other theme. So, like, that's kind of the main sticking point. Like, is your paranoia real, or is your paranoia like
justified
based on the fact that that perhaps you are kind of going insane to some degree? And both of these stories make you want to think that the characters are going insane when really they are spot on, which to me, and this might play into style a little bit, but like to me that is nowadays would be a cop-out if you wrote this story now. Then I'll give it a lot more credit because it wasn't really, like, especially for They, which was written in 41, I believe.
Yep.
You didn't see that type of story all that often at that point, I don't believe.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, you kind of said it, but I'll phrase it this way, like, these stories are the themes, which is that. And I guess I'll call it, like, Cold War considerations. And yeah, even though one was written before the Cold War technically was on, sure. And you're right, absolutely, Steve, that, yeah, you've seen this kind of thing dozens of times, if not more, since. But like I said, it had to come from somewhere. And so given the considerations of time when they were written and till now, that, yeah, like, you have to give them credit on that front. And yes, it's only focusing, both of them are only focusing on that one thing. But that's why I think we agreed that themes are like the strongest aspect, if not perhaps the driving force in both stories. But I think they were both definitely handled well. And I know that you sort of like maybe are worn out by it at this point. Like,
Right.
like by this kind of stuff. But I'm always still going to like it, even if I've seen it dozens of times and so forth. But I still like gravitate towards it. And I think these both did a good job. And I'm glad to have finally, at least read 8 o'clock in the morning, and pleasantly surprised that Heinlein wrote one very similar like it with using that same device, we'll say.
Well, I think the device is timeless in a sense because
Sure.
it's America has a very individualistic drive to it. And if they and 8 o'clock in the morning discuss an assault on individualism in different aspects. In they, it's a very intelligent man who is being put down and classified as crazy by the society. And it turns out that it's all him. The entire society around him is the illusion. And that they're acting like they're making it look like it's raining outside, but for only half the house kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it has to be imperfect for him to piece out that it's an illusion, but he has that drive. In a way, 8 o'clock in the morning, it's more accidental that he's awakened by a hypnotist.
Yeah.
But it has more consumerist drive to it. Especially the movie has that aspect.
Sure.
Like the TV and all those aspects of sapping it, that what they want you to think, what they want you to think to become familiar isn't actually acting in your interest.
Yeah.
And I think that you can recycle this story with different themes because of that kind of American individualistic drive. Yeah. Thesis over.
I mean, I do like that point. It's an interesting aspect, and I do agree with it. But I wouldn't have thought about it perhaps like as strongly, or would have seen it as much. But certainly, I agree that it's there, and you're right. Like, it's a good framework because it's broad enough that you can apply it in a lot of cases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be ones for everybody.
And I think that's what the strongest one we're probably going to get out of it.
The strongest aspect for both, for sure.
Scott, antagonist.
All right, so outside insidious forces who are trying to convince you of some alternate reality, or at least fooling. It's like a Descartes thing, right? Like, more or less, which I was going to probably mention in themes just now, but I'll mention here. So in it's the glow rooms. They got some weird name to them. Like, it doesn't actually matter. In 8 o'clock in the morning, like reptilian faces or like something like that, but they squawk in bird language. But it's just some weird, in quote unquote, alien forces, an alien in the sense of the word, like other than human, more or less, right? Other than human consciousness. Maybe a hive mind, maybe not. Doesn't, again, quite matter, but it's that these things are controlling or manipulating or otherwise deceiving real people, again, quote unquote, real people. And yeah, it's going to always kind of be effective. And like I said, and to what you just said, that's a sort of the pod people type mentality thing, right? It's like that's even that story itself and movie are effective for the very same reason. So I think we all gave both stories a 1 to antagonist. I certainly did. I believe you guys did too.
Yeah.
We did
discuss this earlier.
The themes almost require the antagonist to be effective because the whole point is that they're deceiving the main, protagonist or protagonist in some way, and they happen to be the one person or group of people who figure this large conspiracy out, this vast, this deception.
Both of these stories hinge strongly on their themes, and those themes mean that there needs to be a strong antagonist.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty much what I'm saying.
And that's, I mean, I don't think I need to say much more than that. I think you said it all. Like the antagonists of both of these stories are antagonizing to the main characters literally the entire time. That's the entire point of them.
Yep.
And both these stories are good. They're enjoyable reads. That means that the antagonists do a good job because they are such a linchpin in the stories.
The fear of the outsider infiltrating society is one of the core tribal fears we have as humans. In either propaganda or in sci-fi stories. It doesn't matter. It's a classic thing that will always be frightening.
Yep. So, I agree.
Yeah. So ones
like the story, they both would fall apart if they weren't effective. So like you said, Steve-O, they have to be, and they are.
Yeah. Okay, and on to me with protagonists. Now, this is where it diverges a little bit. We mentioned this a bit, that 8 o'clock in the morning, the guy kind of accidentally discovers that he's in this world that has he's being deceived by an alien like host, and he doesn't panic. He actually keeps his cool, but he decides to murder like his way to the truth, or to getting a way to wake up the other people. And it's more of an intelligent man coming to this conclusion on his own, and it feels to me that that character has a lot more agency in his actions. That in that he pulled himself up to the level that the 8 o'clock in the morning I just accidentally stumbled
Fell
upon.
into, yeah.
And I think that makes that main character from a much stronger protagonist. So I'm going to give him a 1 and a 0 to 8 o'clock in the morning.
That's almost exactly what I was going to say. I think I feel the same way about these two characters. There's one character that has agency. There's one character that stumbles upon a vast conspiracy. And like, there's one character that discovers a vast conspiracy of his own volition and like his own intelligence.
Yeah.
And there's one character that just wakes up to see it happening. And whereas the character in They has a lot of interesting little foibles and like interesting little things about him, the character in 8 o'clock in the morning is kind of just pulled through the story,
Yes.
based on what's happening to him. And that's kind of, it reminded me actually a lot of the Hanging Stranger, the Philip K. Dick story that we read.
Which we also reviewed. Check that one out.
More so than They by far, but like, it's kind of got that same sort of feel to it. But I agree, it's going to be a 1 for They, a 0 for 8 o'clock in the morning for me.
Yeah, I mean, we all agree because it seems obvious that that's the case in the story. Like, I guess I'll just slightly add on that, it's the agency thing, and it's more like, for me at least, it was in They, the main character was more well-rounded. You got more of his personality, pretty much, like because he was having philosophical conversations with the deceiving force, more or less.
Right.
But in 8 o'clock in the morning, you're right. Like he randomly sort of like accidentally stumbles in to being awakened, and then decides the best way to go along after that. The best course of action is to start murdering every creature he sees, and that's going to be helpful somehow. I guess. I mean, it was to an extent.
Seems like a bad idea,
right? But also, like, maybe the thing is like it's the nature of like the length of the stories, because 8 o'clock in the morning is not by far, but definitely shorter than They. So it's not much like it just doesn't have the room to breathe. And I don't know if necessarily. It's not a negative thing per se, but there's just not enough space to flesh out the character, nor I think does there need to be necessarily. But because of that, then he's a flatter character, and that's why I gave him a 0 pretty much.
right?
On top of everything you guys just said as well.
Well, the funny thing is we actually have a movie to compare it to, where it does have the room to breathe.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
I much rather prefer the movie to
Right.
the short story.
Oh, Roddy Piper is definitely a more interesting protagonist than this guy, for sure.
But regardless,
and you gotta love Keith David.
And Keith David, of course, yes, obviously.
Steve-O,
Yes.
explain why we're giving 0s to secondary.
So in They, there literally are no supporting characters because every like organism outside of the main character is part of the antagonist.
Mhm.
It's kind of just like
Even
this
his fake
phalanx of this phalanx of like
Falsities.
antagonism, basically. In 8 o'clock in the morning, there are characters who are human as opposed to like all the aliens, but those human characters are basically just set dressing.
Yes,
they're,
exactly.
They're furniture to the story, and none of them are all that super interesting. So, I mean that's going to be all I'm going to say about it. I'm going to give it a 0, and I think we all are, just because it's not all that great in terms of supporting characters, and it doesn't. They don't need to be like.
Again, it's
that's
not
fine.
the point of the stories.
Yeah,
And
it's
yet-
fine, but they don't address that portion of storytelling, I guess we'll say, and for that I'm gotta give it a 0.
Yeah, I mean, they're 100% props, as you said. And so, like, that's the reason. Like, if they're basically non-existent characters, you kind of have to give it a 0.
Yeah.
All right, Scott. Dialogue.
All right, so I gave a 1 to both stories outright, and I will explain. In They, I thought the dog was very good, and I think you guys will maybe expand upon. Like, he's having philosophical. He's basically Descarting, like I said, against the deceiving forces. But I thought it was interesting exchanges, at least.
Yeah.
Certainly, like, it brings up that philosophy and a couple other things. I think there's a line in there where, like, he's talking about children and how, like, children are evil, like they're annoying little bastards, something like that. There's another line or two that was quite good. I don't have my copy in front of me, but I remember highlighting a line or two. And so I was wavering about 8 o'clock in the morning because it was like not flat per se, but like serviceable. Like it's the things that people sort of, or at least the characters, the one human and his interactions with the aliens, like made sense to say to each other. But I'm going to steal something that Steve will convince me of to give it a 1 for precast when we were laying out our scores, is that the obey, stay asleep stuff. Like when he starts seeing like what is actually like being broadcast, if you will, on the television. It's like, stay tuned to the station, follow our instructions, go to your house, go to work tomorrow, sleep 8 hours, work 8 hours, play 8 hours, like all that stuff.
Die.
And yeah, it's because, yes, certainly my love of the movie They Live, so I'm sort of retroactively applying it to it. But I mean, it's in the story. Like it's the reason it's in the movie is it's in the story. So even if the dialogue in quotes per se itself isn't that great, that stuff I'm sort of like gonna count as such in a sense. It's sort of tied into style a bit, but I think it's more like it's more weighted towards dialogue.
So I have a weird question.
Okay.
All right, there's a line that you just reminded me of in 8 o'clock in the morning, where the controller calls up and tells him he's going to die from a heart attack at 8 in the morning.
Yeah.
And then he thinks it's not going to affect him because he's woken up.
Right.
And he at the end he dies.
But Stinger, he dies at 8 o'clock in the morning. Yes.
Thematically, is that him like saying that we can never escape our fate, no matter how much we fight against it?
Well, I guess I'll answer with, if I recall the line as well, towards the end, that he sort of like one man single-handedly did the plot from They Live, which is to say he salted the broadcast station where they're sending out all these messages from. Mm-hmm. So ostensibly, the story implies / wants you to think that he indeed awoke the West of humanity.
No, he didn't get to see the war.
Yeah, it's that line. So like,
well, it says it outright that humanity eventually wins.
Yeah. Does it?
Surprise! Yeah, at the end. That's
I don't remember
it
saying that exactly, but I mean, he can. I do think that he convinces or is able to at least wake other people up from their the cloud of deception. Read it to me.
George did not live to see the victory that finally came. He died of a heart attack at exactly 8 o'clock.
Okay. So like, so what was your question? Like, given that he died,
well, I forgot to bring this up in themes, and I admit to. What is the point of that?
Having him die?
Is
because they told him to.
They told him to.
Yeah, I think to some extent it's that you can't escape your fate, even if you are fighting against it, and like
or know about it.
Yeah. Honestly, to me, looking at this story, there is that aspect of it for sure when it was being written, but also I think that he thought, it'd be cool at the end of this.
It'll be a badass ending.
If he dies because they told him he had to. Like, that always... And maybe I'm wrong, but I think that type of thing enters into every writer's mind as they're writing something. It's like, this would be really clever of me if I did this, and then you read it later, you're like, that wasn't as clever as I thought it was. Still pretty good, though.
And confounds critics.
Exactly.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, like, I don't know if it's, like, that big of a deal to me, but I see, like, why you would bring it up, like, why you're, like, want to bring it up as a discussion point. I think I also agree with you, Steve-O, at least speaking from personal experience, when I was trying to, like, write fiction, like, I'm like, this is going to be awesome, it's a fucking sweet idea, like maybe, but, I don't know.
What does it mean?
I still think it's still like it's fine overall, but I get that you can sort of nitpick it there, like pick apart that little aspect of it.
Yeah,
I know it's the title drop.
But as far
it's like maybe it's not a nitpick. It's
no. It's an important part of this story. I agree, but I think it's like
maybe just to do a title drop.
In a very short story like this, it's kind of like, I can be clever about this, and like I can drop this in here, but yeah, as far as dialogue goes. As Scott mentioned, I like I love They Live the movie, and that obey, like stay asleep, that type of stuff is in this story as well, and I really like that as part of it. The dialogue is fine. It's nothing like the dialogue between characters, I suppose.
That's what I mean.
Is fine. It's nothing amazing, but it does what it needs to do and gets out of the way. But because of that extra little, and it's gonna impact style as well, but because of that extra little stylistic flair in terms of the spoken word, in terms of this story, I'm gonna give dialogue a 1.
Yep,
I agree for both of these because again, as I said, it's not the most impressive thing, but
it's perfectly fine.
It does its job, and it's not intended to. It's not pretending to be something it isn't at that time. It's for the most part works really well.
Exactly.
And I meant to say also that I thought they had much stronger dialogue in terms of these two stories. I really like the dialogue between the Doctor and the main character in They.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And based on that alone, I would give that a 1 as well.
Yep.
So I'm here to talk about style now, and I believe I gave They a 0 and 8 o'clock in the morning a 1.
It's the checker
Yep,
flex.
that's correct.
Yes. It's again. I don't want to punish her story for it being written in the 1940s and me like, but it's stylistically much flatter.
Yeah.
Actually, at 8 o'clock in the morning, it had me
At hello.
wondering to the end. No, it did not. Well, I wondering to the end whether he was crazy or not. Because again, I didn't know if it matched one to one to They Live. And I thought it did the mystery much better. Because they made the character of the protagonist in 8 o'clock in the morning seem like his actions were somewhat crazy.
More extreme.
But then again, I don't know what my actions would be if I noticed that Steve-O next to me is a reptilian creature.
I would definitely instantly slit both of your throats if I saw you change into lizard creatures.
Yeah.
Why? You should just become friends with us.
Nope.
Get it on the ground floor, man.
Nope.
Of the alien revolution.
Fuck your conspiracy
Anyway, I agree with that score. I think you and I had the same scores for everything. So I agree with that score. I think that not They Live. 8 o'clock in the morning had a very interesting stylistic element to it, whereas They was told pretty straight.
Yes.
And that straight telling of a Heinlein story, while still a good Heinlein story, does not do anything that makes me want to give it a 1 for style. Whereas They, 8 o'clock in the morning, has this like very interesting little breaks in the story that like kind of bring you back into what's going on with the invasion, I guess, and like all these little reminders of what's happening in the story that are stylistic choices. Whereas I thought that They was more slack on those.
Yes.
So it's a 0 for They, 1 for 8 o'clock in the morning.
Now the big difference here.
Now, Scott. I gave both a 1 to style, and I'll try to expound upon why. And something I said to E at lunch when we were sort of discussing pre-precast, if you will, that like Heinlein's I like Heinlein a lot, and like I said, this is a story that I didn't read like previously, even though I've read a lot of his other stuff. That it's simple. It's almost like Hemingway-esque, is kind of what I said. It's not like fancy, not trying to be, but it's just there's something about it that is just so solidly effective, at least to me. And this one is no exception. So like while I see what you said, like I can see that angle. To your score, I don't quite agree. And 8 o'clock in the morning, like it had a bit more, I want to say flair to it, I guess, but it's the closest word I can think of to what I'm trying to impart, to what I mean. So like I think they were both goddamn solid, and I wasn't like bored. I wasn't like, thinking to myself that could have been written better, or if only it was edited like this or that way, it would have been like a better, more effective way to impart the story. So I think it's like I don't see how you can give Heinlein a 0, but I guess you are. But I'm not. So I guess that's just sort of generally what I have to say about them. I think they were both perfectly damn good sci-fi stories, and again, knowing what I know of him and what I've read previously, that it's just as good as most other things he's done.
Well, if you only want the amount of flair, well, then okay. But some stories have more, and we encourage that.
All right, fine. Thank you, Mike Judge from Office Space. But no, I mean, like to me, like I just didn't notice it. Maybe it didn't like affect me, bother me as much as you guys. So I think they're both perfectly solid. But I do agree that 8 o'clock in the morning has again a bit more of like more dynamic style, like just a little more interesting style to it. But I still think they deserve a 1 to both, and I'm giving them both a 1.
Okay, Scott, continue talking with recommendation.
All right, yes, I recommend both. Like I said, I had not read another. I didn't even knew Heinlein wrote a story called They, or what it was about. That he wrote this sort of type of using the theme and antagonist as we discussed earlier. So having done it now, I'm like, yeah, it's not the best one that I've ever read of his book or story, but it's damn solid, like I said, and I totally would recommend it at this point. Like, yeah, if you like Heinlein, I would say it this way, like to most people I like generally be talking to, like, yeah, oh, if you like Heinlein, I just recently read one that I never heard of, and I think you'll be a fan of this one as well. And I knew about 8 o'clock in the morning. I knew there was a story that They Live was based on, but I never actually read it, like I said, until for this episode. And I would also recommend it. In fact, I would recommend what we did, read both in one sitting or like back to back, and then sort of parse them out together.
They're the same story.
It's a good double feature, like I said.
I think that there is something you said for a good short story, which both of these are. I actually enjoyed They more than 8 o'clock in the morning, despite the fact that I give the stylistic
bizarrely yes,
leg up to 8 o'clock, just because They is a more interesting, like, philosophical discussion about this, whereas 8 o'clock in the morning is kind of like almost like They Live, like, in terms of it's an action story,
a very condensed version of it. Yes.
Like some crazy shit happens, a guy murders a lot of people, and then you see what happens after that. Like, they're both. They is more like philosophical, like I said, so it's a little more of a slower burn. It's a little bit of a longer story. Yeah. I say longer in quotes. They'll both take you less than 25 minutes to read.
Yeah.
And 8 o'clock in the morning will probably take you less than 10 minutes to read. But they both have really interesting elements to them, and they both I think both these stories will stick with me, and that is a strong recommendation for me.
I agree with what you guys said. I think our review discusses why these are important stories even to this day. And I think they're worth a read, especially since it's not a burden to read either of them. So, yeah, go check them out. We'll put links in our in the description. Yep. All right. So, Steve-O, you got the scores?
I do. I believe that we have... They scored a 7 for me. Oh, I should do this the other way. Scored an 8 for Scott and a 7 for me and Ian.
Yes.
And 8 o'clock in the morning scored 7s all around. So that for They, it's a 7.33 repeating aggregate. And
repeating, of course.
Of course. And for 8 o'clock in the morning is a 7 straight. So that's what we thought of them. They were pretty solid stories. Not perfect, but pretty good.
All right, well, I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer, and I, for one, welcome our alien overlords. Here with Stephen Hermosi.
I feel like you said something about solipsism the other day in the sign-off, and it would have been better saved for this. Anyway, goodbye.
Just say solipsism.
Solipsism.
And Scott Thurlow.
And don't obey or stay asleep, but keep listening to our podcasts. Good night.
Yes, trust us.
Matsu-Do About Nothing. Matsu-Do About Nothing. Music by Chris Morgan.
Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Matsu-Do About Nothing.
This has been a Lost Cinemas production. All rights reserved.